Welcome to our iCord cast-on tutorial. For this you're going to need an iCord, an 8-stitch iCord cast-on for this already. You then need yarn, which is the yarn you're going to use for your project. You're going to use a darning needle and scissors and your double-pointed needles because you use this method for knitting from the centre out. So you take your iCord that you've already cast on, we do have a tutorial for that, and then using the yarn that you're going to work your project with, you then knit that onto the double pointeds. So in this instance I have 8 stitches, so I'm going to knit 2 stitches onto each. If you're making our Snuggle Me blanket, you need 12 stitches and you need 3 stitches onto each. As with all double pointed when you're knitting with double pointeds, I find it useful to move the stitches to the centre of the needle as I move to the next needle. This helps the stitches stay on. I also draw quite tightly onto the stitches as I pick them up. And again, this just keeps the stitches on the needle. It's quite useful when you're working around on double pointeds. And again, you just pick up another 2 stitches, move them to the centre of the needle, and then you can kind of secure them with your thumb as well. You then work the last 2 stitches from the iCord, and that will distribute your stitches across your 4 needles. And then you're ready for the really tricky bit, which is joining the 4 of those in the round. I normally place them on the table so that I can get them sorted out, as it gives me a base to start from. So then you organise your double point needles into a square around your iCord, so that the last stitch you completed is next to the stitch that you started with. You then find your working yarn, leaving the tail of the yarn and the tail of the iCord just to hang down. You don't need to worry about those at this moment. They do mark the start of the round, which is quite useful. You then knit into the first stitch that you picked up, and it can be a little bit fiddly. You then give the tail of the yarn that you used when you started a little tug to secure it. You then knit the next stitch. And what you do on this row will be told, the pattern will dictate what you do. So for example, in some instances for this, you will be increasing. For this, we're just doing a plain row to start. Then you work all of the stitches around. You can see why the iCord has been used in this case, because it's created that circle for you to work off of. Rather than having to cast those individual stitches onto the needle, you can do that. You can use a pinhole cast on in this place, but I find this much easier. You then work again to the start of the round. And it is fiddly. There's no getting away from it. So then once you're back to the start of the round, you'll do the next row of if you're using a chart or if you're using a pattern, you will work the next one just with the main pattern, as if you hadn't cast on using an iCord, you just simply joined in the round and were working away. You then work a number of rows until the piece of work is quite stable. And then you'll do the next bit, which is removing your iCord and securing the centerpiece of the work. Once you've completed the work to the point where you've done a good bit of the pattern, maybe 6 to 8 rows, you then want to take your iCord and remove it. So to do that, you take the original thread that you started at and you thread it into the centre of the work. The most important thing there is that you don't snag it as you go through. So you'll see here that we've used a high contrast yarn, and that's really important. So what you're trying to do here is grab each of the stitches, the working yarn that are currently held on the iCord, so that you can then pull it tight. It replaces the iCord, and then you've got a perfect centre, little belly button essentially, which is why they call it a belly button cast on. It creates a little perfect pulled in edge, pulled in centre even. So what I'm doing here now is I'm picking them up. You can see that I'm going in from the top underneath each individual stitch of the main working colour. Of course, it's tricky and you have to be careful not to snag the work as you go through. Now you can clip out the iCord later on if necessary if you do catch any of the stitches in it, but you are best to not do that, as it is easier to remove the iCord if you haven't caught any of the threads of it. So you go all the way around. In this case, I'm going to do it 8 times. I want to pick up 8 stitches because I cast on 8. If I had more, I would be casting on more. So for example, for the Snuggle Me blanket, as I mentioned before, you do need to pick up the 12. It's really important that you grab each of the stitches, otherwise it will unravel on you. I had to do this a number of times before I got that when I was doing this tutorial. So then you dig them out. And you don't need to worry about the iCord as such because that is just waste yarn anyway. I'm using a curved darning needle as well. I wouldn't sew or I wouldn't do any seaming or any picking up if I didn't have a curved needle. It makes it much easier. So then once you're around to the start, you just make sure that you grab the first one that you went into again. And what that'll allow you to do then is to pull, and as I should have said before, you do work in the opposite direction to the direction in which you are knitting. That allows you to pull against the knitting, to pull through the circle. Now it's ready to pull. You can give it a little tiny pull. You can see that it's pulling in already. So once you've done that, you don't sew that in straight away. You turn the work after checking that it's caught all of the stitches, making sure that they're all right. So you turn the work to the right side. And then what you're going to do is you're going to remove the iCord. So what I normally try to do is I knit a long iCord, and I might use it a number of times, particularly where I'm doing something like blanket squares, where I will need an iCord over and over again. And I just remove it like this. Some people might be, and you definitely can cut it out if you don't like it, or if you're making something where you're only going to need it once. As you're going, you do need to check that you have cut all of them. You can go around again using the pink yarn on the inside to make sure you do have them all. It's not the end of the world, although it is less than ideal. But with knitting, you can hide all of these things. You also don't need to use a needle, you can use your fingers as well. Then you just pull out the rest of the iCord. And it's out. So you do then is you go to you pull, you can see there as it pulls close, you're pulling out the thread to create your centerpiece. Not the tidiest in this instance, but again, where you have that situation, you just make sure you just, I usually use the tail yarn to even it out. And then you just sew it in as normal, as you would a normal piece of thread. And then that completes your belly button cast on. And what you do then is you take your work and you continue knitting until you've finished the pattern that you're working from. And that is the iCord cast on.